Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to our memorial for Elliot. And many of you have come from far away and have braved, this insane New York marathon. So I know it wasn't good planning, but it's great that you're here. But we are live streaming this, and there's people in California and Miami and Katona and are watching on YouTube, and we are feeling you, and you're with us too. Elliot once had a terribly dangerous case of pneumonia. He could barely stand up. I took him to the hospital, and as we were checking in, the nurse asked if he wanted to be resuscitated if anything bad happened. "What?" he said. "Mr. Lawrence, would you want to be resuscitated in case of emergency?" "What?" Again, she repeated. So I yelled in his ear, "Dad, do you want to be resuscitated?" "Yes, yes, yes, of course I want to be resuscitated." And that was Elliot in a nutshell. He loved life. He really had no use or interest in death, or memorials for that matter. About 10 years ago, when Margot and I asked him and Amy at dinner what their final wishes might be, or what they might like their memorial to be, a piece by Barry Velko.
if there was a marathon in music like our Tony Awards, well, the cats know about this. Elliot, for sure, would be the winner every year. I talked to Jamie, about doing this, and what is a classical kind of straight musician? I came into the studios, I knew nothing about it, nothing about these wonderful players, and they're really cool cats. I was a real square, and I knew nothing about it. But there was, at the center of it, there's this man, Elliot Lawrence, and Jamie will attest to this, and Kim will attest to John Beal. Every year I would come in and I would say the same thing. I said, Elliot, he really loves this. He's totally into it all the time, all the way. He's totally with this energy. And I have in my mind one of the most vivid memories is at the end of the show, at the Tony shows, that there are several people who might get the award, and so you don't know which one it's going to be. So this is before the push button. You push a button and it goes. This is when we all had to have all the parts on our stands. And so at the end of the show, and I remember this day, at the end of the show, Elliot would go, with total joy, with a smile on his face, number three, remember that? Number three, and he did this with, and so for the whole show, from beginning to end, he had this energy and this joy, and I'm not just, it really was just this, it's not just joy, but he was so into the process of what he was doing. He was totally immersed into it. He had no mind for taking a break because he could go forever. If it was up to him, we would never take a break. We would just go through, so, the lovely Kimberly was able to help him with that, but still. But it wasn't because he was inconsiderate, it's because he himself was really totally into it. And so when I felt like I wanted to play something, and so as I was thinking about it, I realized that I should bring this memory of him, and the memory also that beyond this, I'm sure that people that know him better than I didn't really know him that well. Shortly before he passed away, I dialed a wrong number, and it was his number. And I said, who am I talking to? I didn't recognize the voice. And they said, well, this is Elliot Lawrence's line. And they said, who is this? And I said, Eugene Moy. And so he called out my name. He said he's going to call you back. And he did. He called me back, and we had a nice conversation. I wanted to say that at the end of, we'd always, shake hands at the end of a show or something. And a feeling that I got always from him was this feeling of affection. I'm sure many people in the room have this. But I got a strong feeling of affection. So I offer this piece. It's a Bach Adagio. It's very, very beautiful. I don't mean it as a really somber piece, but I mean it is pretty somber. And it's, but I mean it remembering that affection and my affection. I'll say it this way. To Elliot. Okay, it's time for the cats to wail on their actions.
Thank you, Oliver. Wow. Oh, thank you for that beautiful performance. Can you make that light not so bright? No? Okay. My job today is to talk about Elliot and Amy's marriage, a 61-year partnership. I'm so happy to be here. I have to say, I love the way they loved each other. They met in 1956 on a blind date, the band leader with a killer smile and that laugh, wow. And the Wellesley alum, beautiful, brilliant, listening more than she talked. And boom, 3 months later, they were set to get married. But then Amy got mono. Elliot came to the hospital with a recorder and began to teach her how to play it. That was so Elliot. They were both serious people, Amy a bookworm, Elliot absorbed by music, always at the piano. And early in their marriage, he was on the road a lot, while Amy was at home having babies. She once told me that Elliot had it written into his contracts that he'd be allowed to come home for a weekend at least every 2 weeks. Alexandra was born in 1956, Danny in 58, Jamie and Mia afterwards, so I guess that was true. From early in their marriage, they shared a deep passion for art, primarily African sculpture, which you saw in Mia's piece, wonderful piece, and pieces from the Pacific Islands, and they began putting together what became a major collection. Once at dinner, when Amy was already very ill, Elliot made a point of talking about the magnificent Japanese screen, which you saw. That was Amy's find, he said. She called me from the dealer and said, Elliot, you've got to come down here right away and see this. Amy has always had a great eye, he said, which he did. They were both strong personalities with strong opinions, but they never, it seemed to me, fought to the death. Sometimes when Elliot thought that Amy was getting a little heated, he'd put his arm around her, Amy, darling. Or if they disagreed, he'd kid around. When those big down coats were first in style, Amy told me, Elliot said he'd pay me not to get one. One night, many years ago, finishing dinner pre-theater, Amy couldn't find their tickets in her purse. I thought, uh-oh. But Elliot put his arm around her and said lovingly, that's my Amy. She wasn't scatterbrained. He was just saying, it's okay, don't worry. And they left to go to the box office. Once at Purdy's in the country, Amy and I got back a little late to the house as Elliot waited, pacing. Car loaded and ready to go back to the city. Let's go. And Amy quietly, okay, Elliot, dear, we're here. And she whispered, Elliot has never gotten over the trauma of herding the band onto the bus. She wanted me to understand too. Concerned because Elliot would get anxious about getting to work on time, Amy arranged for a car and driver, Jesus Rojas, so Elliot could relax when he wasn't insisting on the fastest way to go. Also so Elliot. One evening, a man Elliot knew from the ad agency came to dinner, someone who knew that Elliot had traveled with his own band since he was 20, and after meeting our elegant Amy whispered in my ear, "Is this Elliot's first wife?" Once Amy and I were talking about the heroine of a book, and I said, "I wonder what happened to her after." And Amy said, "Lynn, there was no after. She's a fictional character." Her life ended when the book ended. That was so Amy. But now, remembering her and Elliot so vibrant and alive, it's sad to think that for our lives with them, there is no after. I keep hearing them, though. Elliot, dear, Amy, darling.
But he's watching on the live stream. So hi, John and Barbara. But he asked me to say a few words on his behalf. I was just a kid when Elliot blew into our lives. Amy had always been a special favorite of my mother's, so when she became engaged to Elliot, there was quite a bit of excitement. From the very first, it was clear that Elliot was also a very special person. He was a band leader and a bit of a celebrity, but even more importantly, he was a rather charismatic character with a big smile, lots of laughter, and an engaging manner. From the first, he seemed to take a personal interest in me, and over the years, this interest, which was mutual, developed into a real friendship. In many respects, Elliot became like an older brother, a role he continued to play even in later years. He would take me along to meet art dealers, and if I found a piece of African or pre-Columbian art, Elliot would insist the dealer give me a good price. As a result, I was able to acquire a few small pieces, which I still own. More recently, when my firm held group conference calls for clients, Elliot would always be on the calls. He would ask good questions, and he would call me afterwards to critique the call and the speakers. If one of my partners had spoken poorly, Elliot would tell me to send the guy to speech school. After all, a performance was a performance, and second rate didn't cut it. Elliot loved investing, and so he took a great interest in these calls. He wanted us to shine. Meanwhile, of course, he was still buying and selling African art, building a museum-quality collection. His enthusiasm for this and much else in his life was infectious. Elliot, you will be missed. So, here we go. So some of you might know that I like to write silly songs. This may have sprung from growing up, going to musicals and listening to the songs Elliot wrote, and many times he wrote lyrics. The lyrics were by Amy. So when Elliot and Amy had their 45th wedding anniversary, I decided to write them a song about their history together and their stories they would tell us growing up. So they lasted 61 years before Amy passed away, and I've adjusted the song accordingly. But I kind of like this song, and I feel this is its last moment on the planet, and today can serve as the biographical portion of the memorial. So before I launch in, I just wanted to give a few cliff notes for the younger crowd and non-family members. An MRS degree. This was a derogatory term used to refer to young women going off to college to find a husband. Devon is a suburb of Philadelphia. My father's parents were named Esther and Stan Broza. Elliot formed his first band, the Bandbusters, at age 12 and painted the name on both sides of his parents' station wagon, much to their horror. Amy's mother, Maya, was from New Haven and suffered from terrible postpartum depression, and she didn't make it past Amy's first birthday. She was literally never spoken of again. Olga, Amy's wonderful aunt, raised her as her own daughter until she was about 5 or 6, at which point her father, David, who had visited her over the years, collected her and took her home to his new wife, Edie. So this was tough for Amy, but eventually she and Edie became very, very close. Who could resist our mother? Amy, as a child and as a newlywed, was irresistible. When you get to a certain age, it's time to take a bit of stock. Peruse their history, and I'm sure you'll all agree their marriage should be turned into a song. I'll try to make it brief, but goodness grief, there's just so much to be spoken. Here's a token to Amy and her husband. Elliot, born in dear old Philly, be precocious from the start. Esther made him practice silly, said, Elliot, play with heart. It wasn't enough to be the only Jews in Devon. This one conducted before the age of 7. Polio and asthma just couldn't keep this young boy down. Meanwhile, cross town, Amy was born a Park Avenue child, though this she kept hush-hush. She had so many secrets it would make a grown shrink blush. Her first mother, Maya, sadly went to heaven. Amy had 2 more before the age of 7. Olga and Edie were difficult, but they brought her up well. We can tell all at last when she met the band leader from Philly, PA. He said, Amy, dear, marry me, and I'll send you right back to school. And that's how it was for 61 years. Oh, but I digress. Elliot formed a band, the Bandbusters. Things would never be the same. Mr. Broza hired Broza for his station's house band, so Elliot changed his name. Found success with Cohn and Kahn and Mulligan. Great, but what a mess. Night after night after night took a toll on his health. Was this his real self? Amy went to Wellesley College, but what would you have guessed? Shakespeare, Goethe, Freud were worth a lot, but not an MRS. She went to Europe being courted by the boys, but though the backs of choppers can make a lot of noise, she came home to work, but publishing would not be her fate. Next a blind date, and whoa, when she met the band leader from Philly, PA. He said, Amy, dear, marry me, and I'll send you right back to school. And that's how it was for 61 years, happily living through thick and through thin, with the hits and the flops and the one-night stands. No, that's not the kind I mean. First came Alex, then Danny, then came Jamie out the door. Amy demanded that they move back to the city. Oops, Mia makes them 4. They were complicated years, but that's the way it goes. EL went from radio to TV to shows, and night after night after night he conducted some things, but some were poor. But what are reviews for? Amy got her master's, then a doctoral degree. Then she snatched up an MSW to make it an even 3. She's taught and she's lectured. She's even sold old books. She's run a department while keeping her good looks. And throughout it all, one never knew just what she had done. It's been quite a run since when she met the band leader from Philly, PA. He said, Amy, dear, marry me, and I'll send you right back to school. And that's how they were. So fast, it's a blur. Amy says yes. E.L. said no. Amy says wait. E.L. says go. Happily married for 61 years through the scratches and sneezes and bruises and breezes that life's bestowed on them. 65 years, the best of friends.
Good afternoon. Elliot employed my family and I for many years, and he loved it when we called him Big Boss. Our mornings would start with going to see him in the room and say, "Good morning, boss, how are you?" And his first remark was, "I'm very hungry." I remember he hired me to work in the office, but one day he said, "There's nobody to help me on the Sunday. Do you think you can come?" I said, "Of course. How hard can this be?" I remember that Mom had told me he likes his cereal with Cheerios, Chex Mix, bananas, raspberries, whatever fruit we have, you throw it in there. Exciting I was because it wasn't going to be a hard breakfast, but out of all days, he decided he wanted scrambled eggs, English muffin, and bacon. He said, "The English muffins are frozen. Go and get it and defrost it." How hard could it be, right? I was so excited because the plate looked really nice, decorated. I knew that he would be happy. I take it to what we call the white table. And he's sitting there. He takes the first bite. He looks at me and he says, "This is the worst breakfast I've ever had in my life. It is as frozen as a hockey puck." I looked at him, and I tell you, I wanted to cry. And I said, "Well, do you want something else?" And he said, "No. You are going to go back to the kitchen, and you're going to make it again." Now, by this time, I was very nervous, sweating, and if this thing would not defrost, well, we would hear him be very affirmative again. I went back, and yes, the English muffin was nice and crisp as he wanted it. So, El, if you're listening, I am one mean cook when it comes to English muffins now. He had this bell. The bell, everybody that knows what I'm talking about. And whenever he wanted something, he would ring that bell. Now, I do not know whose idea it was to give him a bell. And one day, it mysteriously disappeared, if you can understand. But by this time, he had become a pro with Amazon. And so he knew how to click a button and order whatever he wanted. That bell went missing for a couple of weeks, but then one of the ladies decided to go on vacation and bring him back a Texas bell. She no longer worked there. And so sometimes Elliot would ring the bell this way. And sometimes he would ring it this way. And sometimes he would ring it this way. And we knew that sometimes we had to walk, sometimes we had to pick up the pace, and sometimes we had to run. And running meant he had an emergency, which to him was, "I want a chocolate-covered pretzel." But Elliot taught me that there are things in life that sometimes we'll have to walk for, sometimes we'll have to pick up the pace, and sometimes we'll have to run. But whatever it is, there's always a bell ringing and one that we must attend to. I think about what would have been like with Elliot if I would have been in the room with him during his last hours. And perhaps Elliot would have recited what Sinatra once said and sang. And now the end is near, and so I face the final curtain. My friend, I'll say it clear. I'll state my case, of which I'm certain. I've lived a life that's full. I've traveled each and every highway, and more, much more than this, I lived it and did it my way. Thank you.
I didn't realize that was behind me. But it has to do with the song I wrote, so it works. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you to Jamie for putting this all together. It's truly beautiful. And seeing everyone here, and I know people have flown in and went through the marathon traffic, makes me think of when I used to go to camp. And Elliot sent me to this camp called Camp Greylock for like 6 years. And at the beginning of every single summer, the camp was run by this like huge military dude. And he would come out every summer like he had been waiting all year and talk about great men and what it meant to be a great man and how important they are in your life and how no one should go without one. And I would sit there every year because I had a little bit of a problem with authority, twiddling my thumbs and throwing spitballs and just ignoring him and rolling my eyes. And then I had the honor and privilege of being in the room right after Elliot had passed. And I sat there, and what was the first thing that popped into my head was this speech that I had heard my entire childhood and never listened to, and something I haven't thought about. And it made me realize how great Elliot was and is, and how much he's touched my life, and I'm sure countless of others. And so I went down to write a song. It took about 2 minutes, because all I had to do was just remember what he was like, which I do every morning anyways. So this is about the greatest man I know. Won't you tell me one more story? Don't worry about the time. Won't you sing me one more sweet song? It doesn't have to rhyme. Watch you sit by the piano, talk about the New York Times. Every morning, Papa, you're still on my mind. I used to drop what I was doing whenever you would call. Pretend that I was home alone while the party raged on. No more reason to check my mailbox now that you are gone. No more clippings or advice from my grandpa. Like the oak tree of Purdy's, I never thought you'd go. Oh, I grew up in your shadow, and now I'm all alone. You're the only, you're the only reason I survive. Showed me what I'm meant to do. I'm who I am, and I owe it all to you. Won't you tell me one more story? Don't worry about the time. Won't you sing me one more sweet song? It doesn't have to rhyme. Watch you sit by the piano, talk about the New York Times. Every morning, Papa, you're still on my mind.
Our grandfather loved sweets and was not so keen on broccoli. He liked having Malamars in the pantry or a box of chocolate-covered pretzels. As children, my brothers and I could reliably snag a fudge wafer from Elliot and Amy's freezer. It's hard for me to remember younger Elliot and Amy. Their more mobile years come to me in glimpses. Most of them are in Purdy's. Amy rolling out pie crust on a tile countertop, handing me a fork to jab air holes into the top layer. Elliot grilling in the gazebo, surrounded by the song of crickets. Elliot and Amy allowing my brothers and I to strew Legos all over the floor while they read on the couch.
I am lucky to have stronger memories of a more active Elliot and Amy. Similarly, many of them are set in Purdy's. How grateful we are that they created this place for their family to share so much time together. I know it's hard to imagine given his late years spent mostly inside, but Elliot used to come watch his kids play in the pool. He'd lean against the fence, rarely actually entering the pool area, and oversee as we yelled Marco Polo. I even remember Elliot throwing me baseballs as I practiced my swing. I still have the glove he bought himself so we could play catch together. Sometimes we would get to have sleepovers at the upper house. My siblings and I would be sprawled out in sleeping bags next to Elliot and Amy as I slept in their rolling bed on the screened deck. A now bewildering thought to imagine Elliot sleeping in a pollen-filled breeze. Elliot and Amy showered us with love and care. They shared what was special to them, whether that be roaming around the orchard or bringing us to the theater. It was an exciting night when you got to dress up and go to Broadway. From playing music, performing in a musical, painting, or throwing clay, Elliot and Amy fostered a love for the arts in us and encouraged our creative pursuits.
For us, Papa Amy was one word. They were an unshakable duo exhibiting true partnership. Not many children get to witness such a devoted 60-plus-year marriage. As Amy's health declined, Elliot was attentive to her needs and endlessly patient, making sure she received the best care from their wonderful team of helpers. When Amy passed away, I couldn't fathom the pain Elliot must have been experiencing. We wondered how he would go on. Yet Elliot managed to adapt and continue to find joys in life. Elliot is etched into both of our minds, sitting at the round white table in his living room, stacks of magazines and newspapers surrounding him, and an enormous bowl of cereal in front. Upon entering, Elliot would greet us with a smile and a hearty, "Hello, my friend," his hand reaching out for a welcoming squeeze. No matter the season, he would be wearing a jacket. Perpetually cold, he would never open a single window in the house. Unlike Amy, and to my incomprehension, Elliot felt no need to go outside.
Although he may have physically stayed within the walls of his apartment, his mind was so strong that it seemed that his life was incredibly expansive. He was often busy pursuing a new piece of art, reviewing his portfolio, and digesting the New York Times from front to back. He had a superhuman ability to remain connected to and engaged with the world around him.
There was something deeply reassuring and comforting in the ritual of a visit with Elliot. He would ask about all areas of life. He'd have me run through that semester's best and worst courses, ask about my friends, if I liked my housing, and in his words, if I was going steady with anyone. He wanted to hear about my pursuits and was always ready to celebrate my accomplishments. When we would say goodbye, he would sometimes tear up, telling me that he was proud of me. I think in those times, his mind was on Amy. Even after she passed, he would boast about her graduating summa cum laude from Wellesley. A visit with Elliot was always entertaining. You rarely knew where the conversation would take you. A story about driving through the night with his band to make it to the next gig, putting on the Miss Universe pageant in Vietnam, discussing the latest news headlines, or his most recent African art purchase. He was truly a lifelong learner.
Elliot was a loving grandfather, but also a friend and a confidant. It was such a gift to be able to talk to him about work and seek his counsel as I navigated my early 20s. As the only member of the immediate family not in an art-related field, I often felt like the black sheep amongst artists. When I went to work at a bank after graduation, Elliot's enthusiasm was the encouragement I needed to pursue an alternative path. He was so excited to have a banker in the family that he went ahead and purchased stock in the company. And anyone close to Elliot knows how seriously he took his investments.
Elliot was terrible on the phone due to his hearing, so when you weren't with him, it was hard to keep in touch. Yet sometimes I would open my mailbox and find an envelope containing a news clipping he wanted me to read. His loved ones were always on his mind.
As grandchildren, we got to experience the full extent of Elliot's affection. And while it was incredible to have been adored by him the way we were, it has been equally incredible to witness the love he shared with my dad. They were a team in work, in creating, and in life. It is a relationship that has taught me so much about love, respect, and both of these men. It is a bond we can all wish for in our own lives. Thank you.
Hello.
My name's Jack. I'm one of Elliot's grandchildren. We're going to start by listening to an excerpt of Elliot that he recorded for a small gathering we had after Amy's passing in Purdy's. He didn't feel up for making the trip, so he sent these words instead, the lyrics to a song.
And it's funny, changing the subject, in all our romantic moments, Amy always wished there were Keats and Shelley coming out of my mouth, but instead, only lyrics from the American songbook. So Amy, you are to me everything. My life, my love, everything. You were my guiding star. You were everything I loved.
You are to me everything. My life, my love, everything. When in my sleep you appear, fair skies of deep blue appear. Each time our lips touch again, I yearn for you so much again. You are my guiding star, my haven in heaven above. You are everything I love.
afternoon. My name is Ron Adelman, and I was Amy and Elliot's primary care physician, and it was an immense honor and privilege to take care of each of them. They were both patients who became very close friends. Today, however, my focus is not on Elliot's medical history, but on his involvement in African art. Many of you know of Elliot's musical genius, but probably many of you don't know of Elliot's history in African, Oceanic, and Eskimo art, and his genius for collecting this art. And Jamie asked me to focus on this part of Elliot's life. My pathway to Amy and Elliot started in Long Island, where I live, and from a very strong interest in African art. A neighbor of mine, Soretta Barnett, had an extraordinary collection of African art. And it turns out Soretta and her deceased husband, Howard, were very close friends of Amy and Elliot's. In fact, Elliot always credited them as their major mentors in African art and felt intense gratitude to each of them. And it was through Soretta that I met Amy and Elliot many years ago. And when I first saw Amy and Elliot's collection, I was mesmerized. I remember being bowled over, particularly by a magnificent Fong head that had belonged to Helena Rubinstein and that had a powerful and sacred presence. I was stunned and I couldn't believe that they were able to acquire so many deeply moving and majestic pieces. A little about African art and Amy and Elliot. Many African objects which have served for ceremonial purposes or which were symbols of distinction for tribal rulers possess a mystical dignity as timeless as man's fear of the unknown. Their simple and direct expression gives them a life of their own. And what Elliot and Amy looked for in this art was a certain simplicity and a purity of conception, an aliveness, and the presence in a piece of the dignity and the almost spiritual force which makes one feel that it had actually served in the ceremonial rites for which it was created. This deep passion and emotional connection and respect for the ingenuity of these great, mostly unnamed artists brought them to collect this art and to actively seek out other collections and exhibits. Earlier on, when Elliot was touring with his band, he educated himself by constantly seeking out dealers, collectors, and museums wherever he was on the road. And over the years, as several people have said already, Elliot and Amy developed a major world-class collection which became internationally renowned. They loaned their pieces often and loved sharing their pieces with the world, loaning to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the National Museum of African Art in Washington, and more recently to the Museum de Quai Branly Jacques Chirac in Paris, among many other museums. They were known to all the African art curators of the great museums, the major auction houses, top dealers, and major collectors throughout the world. And after decades of looking at African art, Elliot still got excited by these beautiful objects. It always amazed Elliot that these traditional forms that reflect the beliefs and way of life of people so far away and in such different circumstances could speak to him so eloquently. Elliot told me on several occasions that he was forever grateful for the joy and peace that these objects brought to his life. And Amy was a full partner in the collecting, as it was mentioned prior to my talk here. In fact, Elliot always said that Amy really had the best eye. Years ago, knowing that there were many valuable pieces in his collection, I suggested to Elliot that he sell a piece or two to free him up to search for new pieces. He had never sold a piece before. And Elliot actually listened to me and sold several pieces, which enabled him to seek and find new objects, and he really loved the hunt. He never lost his passion or his excitement in finding new pieces and in living with them. Elliot's enthusiasm never wavered. Several recent purchases were legendary pieces in the world of African and Oceanic art, and Elliot was in awe that he was able to buy these extraordinary pieces and live with them. And as you know, in recent years, Elliot never wanted to leave his apartment. And this made sense to me. I always felt that all Elliot needed for his spiritual sustenance was his collection, which was right there in his apartment. And over the years, on receiving auction catalogs, Elliot would often call me when he saw a small piece he thought I should consider or could afford, or if there was a piece we both were interested in, he would never bid on these pieces, the generous and gallant soul that he was. We also shared an interest in the stock market and spoke often between stock tips and African art recommendations, and there was an enormous delight in these conversations. We really understood one another and had fun with each other. Also, Elliot knew that someday the collection would be dispersed, and he was detached about this. He knew that he and Amy would become a mere provenance. And I know that Elliot hoped that his successors would enjoy the objects as much as he and Amy had. Lastly, the image of Elliot that remains powerfully and indelibly in my mind relates back to a house call I made to Elliot many months ago. When I came into the apartment, he was in the living room, sitting at the piano, much like the film clip showed, and he asked me to sit on the couch in his luminous living room filled with the southern afternoon sun. Elliot began serenading me with a new song he had just composed. It had been a jarring and intense day for me at the hospital, and sitting there amongst the great sculptures and hearing the exquisite music, Elliot had brought peace to me. Indeed, he had healed his weary doctor. Elliot had created a sacred space of luminosity and serenity. Elliot, you were such a magnificent and uniquely gifted human being, and your death has been a seismic loss for the universe and for each of us. So, Elliot, I send you much love, as you would often say at the end of conversation with a relative or friend. I send you much, much love.
Seconds.
We lost family. 30 seconds.
30 seconds.
My brother and sisters, my partner Brian, for their support.
Together we made beautiful music, and I called Daryl my soul filter
20.
because everything went right through him. I had a bunch of songs and we weren't getting them covered. My publisher, John Tita, who's here tonight, goes, "What about musicals?" I went, "What are they?" And he said, "I can get you 20 songs covered 8 times a week." I said, "I'm interested."
I'm having a total Sally Field moment here. I don't know what to do.
Please welcome a 2-time Emmy-winning choreographer, Paula Abdul.
It's truly an honor and a pleasure to be here tonight at the Tonys.
The Best Choreography Award. Since 1947, the legendary choreographers like Agnes
I wasn't assigned anything in particular, which is probably a mistake, Jamie. But of course, the Tonys are a big part of it. First of all, I have to say how amazing and wonderful it is to see this group of musicians and orchestrators and family members and everybody that Elliot loved all in the same room. He would have never let you do this. But nobody would have loved it more, especially all of the music and hearing the kids play and speak. He would have just loved this, so I hope he's enjoying it. Jamie did mention that I was supposed to try to hold it to time, which I'm not very good at. And I have to say I'm a little worried about that because there are a large number of people in this room who are very good at playing people off. They're very skilled in this. And more than a few who are good at actually giving the cue as well. So I feel I probably should stick to time if I can. Elliot was first my boss, and then he became my teacher, and then he was my teammate in the business, and a father figure, and a mentor, and later in life, a confidant and a cheerleader. I knew him for about 33 years, which is less than so many of you all here, but he was, with the exception of my mother, probably the most constant person in my life. It is hard to overstate how dumb lucky I was to end up working for Elliot Lawrence. A friend of mine from the University of Miami named Steve Wexler said, there's a guy who's looking for, he's a music director, and he's looking for somebody to help him a few hours a week with his music publishing. And I think he'd like you. And I said, I don't want a day job. I don't want a day job. I'm not interested. He said, no, you don't know who this guy is. He knows everybody. He's involved in everything. Just go meet him. Of course, I ended up working for him. This was in the late 80s when he was at the peak of his career. His offices were in NW Air. He had, it was a time when Air, he was the music director of the agency, so he had AT&T, Reach Out, Duncan Hines, Folgers, all these huge accounts. He was also doing all the scoring for several soap operas, and he was doing most of the TV variety shows in New York, and he had already been doing the Tony Awards for 20 years at that point. He was at the height, and I suddenly had a front row seat. This little girl from Sarasota was seeing really how the music got made. It was pretty amazing. One day, Elliot called me. I had been working for him for a couple of years. He called me into his office, and he said, I think I can teach you the contracting business. I think you would be good at that. I'm a little concerned because the guys are a little rough. Yes, he was talking about you guys. Not all of you. Some of you are not in the room. And I said, well, Elliot, I've been the only girl on the bandstand since I was 16, so if that's your only concern, I think we're going to be able to do this. So that's when my real education in the music business began. And over the next 30 years, I watched and I learned, and I grew into the job that he had envisioned for me. He was a wonderful teacher, and I could fill several books from all of the things that I learned from Elliot. Quite simply, he changed my life. He was definitely different from anyone I had ever known. He went to every play and every musical on Broadway, every season, always, and the ballet, and to modern dance, and the Phil, and sometimes the Met. His assistant, Gwen, had a full-time job just keeping his tickets organized. Elliot would give an unflinching review of everything that he saw, and he would sometimes tell me, you know, I think your family would like this, which was code for it's pretty pedestrian and probably best suited for tourists. I tried to take that in, the spirit it was given. He, of course, as everyone has mentioned, read the Times, the Journal, and Variety, and of course, as everyone has spoken of, his world-famous art collection. Elliot also handled all of his own business affairs. Several people have spoken about his investments as well, including the music publishing from when he had the big band. He eventually switched to a payroll service to print the checks, but he signed every check by hand, always, including through the last Tony Awards payroll that he was involved in 2019. His budgeting ability was pretty amazing, and he was able to predict what a show would cost and also estimate the copying and arranging within a few $100s. And there's a few people in this room that will tell you that is not easy to do. David Goldberg, who's a producer, recently told me a very long story about the 4 days and events and concerts, leading up to that he and Don Mischer produced for Liberty Weekend in 1986. And the upshot of this very long story was that not only was the music wonderful, but that Elliot had budgeted all exactly and came in right on budget. I'm sure Elliot did not long to be remembered for his estimates, but focusing on both the quality of the music and the bottom line was a really important lifelong lesson for me. Elliot loved his family. Oh gosh, how he'd love to see all you kids here today playing. And he loved Amy. When we were working, you could count on Amy to always call just about at the time the band was supposed to be released. Usually that was around 1 o'clock, so we know we'd got a call around 1:15 from Amy. And she always wanted to know if he had ordered lunch, what he had ordered, and she wanted to make sure that it was something healthy. If she wasn't working, she might stop by the studio, and more often than not, they had a call at least every day, and she would stop by fairly frequently. He always made time for her. They had this loving and devoted relationship. We were, however, from time to time instructed to not mention exactly what it was that he had had for lunch. So kind of our little secret. He loved all the shows, but he did especially love the Tony Awards. He conducted the first national broadcast in 1967, and his last show was 2013. The producers and the directors changed, the technology changed, but Elliot had his high standards for every note of music, and that was the constant. A lot of what we still do today when we do the show is based on the framework that Elliot developed, and we still play charts from his library. I'm probably running short on time, but I do have to tell a story, another illness story. I forget which year, but we were recording at Clinton. Elliot clearly had some sort of bug. Every day, he was getting worse. He had a Kleenex, he was sneezing, he was coughing. He absolutely would not go to a doctor, flat out refused. I was scared to death. He existed on a steady diet of chocolate Ensure poured over ice. Sunday came, he put on the tux, and as always, he conducted a flawless show. Monday morning, he finally went to the doctor. Was it you? I don't know if it was you, but he finally went to the doctor, who sent him directly to the hospital, where he was admitted with pneumonia. He was completely devoted to that show. He was not going to let anything stand in the way. Looking out over the room and having seen everyone who's here, I do want to mention Elliot's loyalty. He always had wonderful players and wonderful orchestrators. He valued and respected, and he loved you so much. There are more than a few people in this room who worked for Elliot or worked with Elliot for over 30 years, and many who were with him for 10 or 20. Once you started working for Elliot, you likely stayed a long time. His favorite engineer, Ed Rack, who's sitting right here, worked with him for well over 30 years and is still our recording engineer and our mixer for the Tonys. His wonderful assistant, Gwen, was with him for probably close to 40 years. He kept in touch with all of his friends and his musician friends throughout his long life. He was also very loyal to us on a daily basis. He took responsibility. He never looked for anyone to blame, and he was always generous with sharing the credit. After he retired, he continued to play the piano every day. That is very late in life. He didn't tell me there was going to be all this wonderful footage of him. It's so great to see him. It was not unusual for him to fill me in. He played the piano every day, and he still read, as everyone said, voraciously. It was not unusual for him to call me and fill me in about something he had read in the trades that I might have missed. He would watch all the specials, and when I would visit him, he wanted all the inside scoop. Not the gossip, but he wanted to know what we had spent on the copying and arranging. Always. I could always count on Elliot for good advice, and he also sent me lovely notes and emails that I really cherish. Elliot was truly one of a kind. Being here today is open even more so than even maybe I realized, to see everyone in all the different ways and all the different types of people whose lives he's touched. His legacy is immense. He loved his children, he loves his grandchildren. His compositions, his recordings, his impact on television music, and the many, many people whose lives he enriched. I am so very grateful to him, and I loved him. He was my boss, he was my teacher, my teammate, my mentor, my confidant, my cheerleader. I hope I can live up to his standards, and I miss him very much.
Okay, where was the other one? 56, 57?
56.
Where?
In the
Who's
string.
talking?
It's the strings.
It's the strings. 56. Let me hear 55 with the strings, please. From 55, slowly. Ready? Go. they can't see there. That's a B.
Okay. There's a B flat.
Oh, that's a computer thing. No, that's why. The computer thing. Okay. Okay. I love it. We can now we can blame the computer. 55. 1, 2. Fred, new guy. 2.
Let's do this. Darn, beautiful writers.
Another masterpiece.
You don't hear some of the stuff I've been playing yesterday. Okay. Here we go. 1, 2, 2, 2.
All right, we got to move this thing along. It's like, sorry, but I guess I had more remarks that I can't believe I'm going to say more remarks, but I'm going to say more remarks because these guys got to go get their instruments and get on stage and all this stuff. So if you're not exhausted already, I will talk a little bit more, but I do like that clip, and thank you, Ed Rack, for secretly taping some of the rehearsals that year, and Ernie, my cousin, who's so talented, for wading through hours of footage to find that thing. And I love that clip because this is exactly what Elliot was like in the studio. He was all business, but he kept it light. He loved great writing for the band, and this was his happy place. And as he jokes about in this clip, if he didn't like an orchestration, he got into a foul mood and would go home angry and take a nap. He took poor orchestration as a personal affront. The day before he died, I went into the hospital to visit, and I said, "Hey, Pop, what's up?" And he's lying there quietly, and he's having trouble breathing. And he says, "I'm trying to think of a name. K. What's his name?" And I said, "Wait, you mean Hershey K? Dad, why are you thinking of him? You didn't even like his writing very much." He's like, "I'm lying here going through all the orchestrators I've worked with during my life." And there you go. I mean, this is true. He thought about orchestrations a lot, and he loved the great writers. He loved Jonathan Tunick, who I think is here today, and he kindly wrote the arrangement that we're going to play later. He loved Al Cohn and Jerry Mulligan, both of whom you're going to hear later, and Tiny Khan and Ralph Burns and Eddie Sauter and Tori Zito. And when you're a band leader and your sidemen are coming and going like they did in those days, the essence of your artistry is in the greatness of your arrangements. And by the way, Elliot was a heck of an arranger and orchestrator himself. As a boy, I went to the recording studio with him every day for a couple of summers. My mom would pack me a bologna sandwich, plain on a white roll with nothing on it, and I would sit silently next to the drummer, Don Lamond, or the bass player, Milt Hinton. My first recording session professionally was on a day when Elliot had to play a piece on the Hammond organ and he couldn't play the pedals. So he taught me what notes to press, and the 8-year-old me climbed underneath the organ and played the notes with my hands while Elliot played the keyboard. And yep, that was a super exciting day. So I was fortunate as a youngster that I got to spend a lot of time with him. He and I had a very easy relationship. And one thing I noticed very early on was that Elliot treated everyone exactly the same way, from our cab driver to whatever star he had conducted for that day, be it Fred Astaire or Barbra Streisand. It was a lesson I internalized and greatly admired in him. As an aside, I started calling him Elliot after high school when I began doing sessions for him, and it was awkward to yell "Pop" when I was talking to him in the control room. So I started calling him Elliot. And the insouciant Alan Rubin, the great trumpeter, yelled out one day, "Just call him Dad," and the whole studio cracked up. Of course, Elliot could be difficult once home. my mom used to castigate him when he came home from work sometimes and say, "Elliot, you are home. You're no longer the music director here. You can't just walk in and start bossing everyone around." So if you wanted a father who took you to the theater and the ballet and classical concerts and let you sit with him in the pit of his musicals or hang out at recording sessions or attend your dance or music concerts, he was a good dad to have. But if you needed a father who was home and helped you with your homework or played ball with you or showed up to soccer games or didn't care if you got up late or whether you washed your hands after touching the dog, or if you needed a father who went to curriculum nights, didn't yell if a droplet of water fell on the wood floor, or the shredded wheat bag wasn't closed all the way, he maybe wasn't the dad for you. But he loved his kids so much. My oldest sister, Alexandra, and my youngest, Mia, both of whom can't be here today, and my brother, Danny, who does not enjoy being up on stage as much as me. And he adored his 5 grandchildren. Most of you have met them today, but you haven't met the youngest, Rumi, who's also wonderful. And then he adopted the babies of all the women who helped him as he aged, and he called them his great-grandchildren. Elliot had great success on Broadway early, something I recommend to all my students. His first 2 shows, Bye Bye Birdie and How to Succeed in Business, were both monster hits. But not all the shows were like that. 10 years later, he got a break when the great songwriter Lionel Bart, who wrote the musical Oliver, became ill, and he and Marty Charnin, who also passed away this year, got called to write at least half of the show La Strada that was not completed yet. La Strada went on to post some of the saddest Broadway stats ever. 12 previews and 1 performance. But we always remember the song Starfish as one of Elliot's prettiest. However, it was totally lost. There was not a lyric sheet or a lead sheet anywhere. But Robert Scher found a bootleg of the show from 1969, and we're going to perform that right now. So I'd like to introduce an amazing singer and a great songwriter, Mumu. Is she still here? Oh, she's here. We've been writing songs together for a few years, and she graciously agreed to come sing the song that was first sung by Bernadette Peters. And here we go. Let's take an A. think, I guess we're going to need that mic back. Oh, she gave it up. All right. Well, the other easy thing about being Elliot's son is that musicians liked him, and so when I put out the call and asked alumni from his band whether they would come play it as a memorial, on Marathon Day in New York City, everyone was like, count me in. So some of these folks here, like John Beal and Jim Pugh and Birch Johnson and Lawrence Feldman, played for Elliot for decades and decades. And if you pull them aside later, I'm sure they can tell you some stories. And then I called guys who had never played for Elliot, and they just said, count me in too. So here we have the Elliot Lawrence Memorial Big Band, and thank you guys for playing. It really means a lot to me. We're going to play a Jerry Mulligan chart called Between the Devil and the Deep Blue Sea.
My name's Lawrence Feldman. I played with Elliot for about 22 years. How many years you got? 35 more. How many years you got? 41. What? Four? Yeah. Anyway, I have only had 22, but I'm here to read a few sentences from another musician, Eddie Daniels, who played for Elliot a lot in the 70s, 80s, and at some point moved out to Santa Fe. Eddie just turned 80 in Santa Fe, and I was there, and he knew about this just a week ago, and he wrote this little sentence, which I had. Elliot, what a sweet man. I always looked forward to the sessions we did, whether it was the Tony Awards or the Miss America pageant, because of the tone he set. Very calm, ultimate respect for the guys in the band, and a sense of humor, and a very dedicated focus on the job at hand, which in the case of the Tonys was no easy task. I never saw him angry, and I know he loved all of it, especially bringing in arrangers on the level of Al Cohen to do this commercial stuff, and who was probably playing at the half note on the same night, or on the same weekend. Elliot always chose the best players, and he knew that everyone in the band could play an improvised solo in any genre if needed be. So it was all fun. Fun for the band, fun for Elliot himself, and even for the stars of the hit Broadway shows at the time. Elliot was a gem. I miss him. Eddie Daniels.
Elevation. It was written by Jerry Mulligan and Elliot, and what part, I mean, definitely the head was Jerry Mulligan, but some other parts were Elliot, I think, and so we're going to give it a shot. I don't think it's been played in this city for like 45, 50 years, so. we're going to play, this is called Snapped Cap by Al Cohen. All right. Thank you for coming. Please come to our reception at 115 Central Park West. If you want to, hold on to your program in case there's marathon security on your way. You can give them their reception and a token will get you on the subway. And I know we've gone a long time. We do have one more chart we could play if you guys wanted to hear. All right, we'll do one more. And then, thank you for coming, and then we'll put this down. We're going to play, this is another Jerry Mulligan chart called But Not For Me, which my parents like to sing. They love Gershwin, so they sing it all the time. All right, we'll do this one more.
Jeffrey.